The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, a canvas of burnt orange and deep crimson painted by the dying sun. Marcus Thornfield rode his bay mare through the scrubland with the practiced ease of a man who had called this harsh land home for 15 years. The wind carried the scent of sage and the distant promise of rain, though the sky remained stubbornly clear. His ranch lay another hour's ride to the east, a modest collection of weathered buildings that had withstood drought, sandstorms, and the occasional raid by desperate men seeking easy cattle. Marcus was a man carved from the same stone as the mesas that dotted his property. Tall and lean, with hands that bore the permanent stains of honest work, he had the kind of face that revealed little but observed everything. His eyes, pale blue like winter sky, held depths that spoke of loss and hard-won wisdom. He had come west after the war, carrying wounds that went deeper than the scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw. The desert had been his salvation and his penance, a place where a man could disappear into the vastness and emerge, if he was lucky, as someone new. The sun was nearly touching the horizon when Marcus heard it, a sound that didn't belong in the symphony of evening crickets and distant coyote calls. It was low and rhythmic, like chanting, but broken by something that made his blood run cold. The unmistakable sound of pain. He reined in his horse and listened, head tilted, every sense alert. The sound came again, carried on the wind from a cluster of red rocks about a quarter-mile to the south. Marcus had learned long ago that in this country, curiosity could be deadly. Smart men minded their own business and kept riding. But something about that sound, the raw human anguish in it, pulled at something buried deep in his chest. He thought of his brother Samuel, wounded and calling for help in a muddy field in Virginia, while Marcus lay pinned beneath a fallen horse, unable to reach him. By the time he'd freed himself, Samuel's voice had gone silent forever. Against his better judgment, Marcus turned his horse toward the rocks. As he drew closer, he could make out a figure slumped against a boulder, and the chanting resolved into words in a language he didn't recognize but understood in his bones. The cadence of prayer, of someone calling on powers greater than himself for strength to endure. The figure was that of an older Native American man, his long gray hair streaked with silver and braided with what looked like eagle feathers. His left arm hung at an unnatural angle, clearly broken, and his dark eyes were closed in concentration as he continued his rhythmic prayer. Marcus dismounted slowly, his boots crunching on the gravelly earth. The sound caused the man's eyes to snap open, and for a moment they stared at each other across the space between their worlds. The native man's face was weathered like ancient wood, lined with the kind of dignity that comes from living close to the earth and understanding its rhythms. Despite his obvious pain, there was no fear in his eyes, only a calm acceptance that spoke of a man who had faced death before and made his peace with it. "Looks like you could use some help," Marcus said quietly, keeping his voice low and non-threatening. He gestured to the broken arm. The man studied him for a long moment, his dark gaze seeming to weigh Marcus's soul. When he spoke, his English was accented but clear. "You are the rancher from the Eastern Valley," he said. It wasn't a question. "I am Joseph Running Bear, chief of the mountain band. My horse stepped in a prairie dog hole 2 hours past. I fell badly." Marcus nodded, recognizing the name. Running Bear's people were known as peaceful, keeping to themselves in the high country and rarely venturing into the lower valleys where the white settlements clustered. They had a reputation for honor and had never been involved in any of the conflicts that occasionally flared between the various tribes and the encroaching settlers. "That break looks bad," Marcus said, kneeling beside the chief. "Bone might be showing through if we don't get it set proper. You got anyone coming for you?" Running Bear's lips curved slightly. "My son knows these rocks. When my horse returns without me, he will follow. But that may be many hours, and night comes quickly." He looked at Marcus with something that might have been curiosity. "You have knowledge of broken bones?" Marcus nodded grimly. More than I'd like, learned field medicine during the war. He didn't elaborate on which war or which side he'd fought for. Out here, such distinctions mattered less than a man's actions in the present moment. I can set it and splint it, but it's going to hurt like hell. You got anything for the pain? The chief reached into a small leather pouch at his waist with his good hand and withdrew what looked like dried root. This will help, but not much. Do what you must. Marcus looked around, assessing what he had to work with. His saddlebags contained some rope, a clean shirt, and a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving for a particularly hard day. The surrounding area provided straight branches from a dead juniper tree. It wasn't much, but he'd worked with less. "I'm going to need to cut your shirt away from the arm," Marcus said, drawing his knife. "And this is going to hurt more than you can imagine before it gets better." Running Bear chewed the root methodically and nodded. "I have walked through fire for my vision quest. I have buried 3 sons and a daughter. Pain is an old friend." His voice was steady, but Marcus could see the sweat beading on his forehead despite the cooling evening air. Marcus worked with the careful precision of a man who understood that one mistake could mean the difference between healing and permanent crippling. He cut away the buckskin shirt, revealing the extent of the damage. The break was clean, though severe, and the bone hadn't pierced the skin. That was something, at least. He cleaned the area with whiskey, causing Running Bear to hiss between his teeth, but make no other sound. "On 3, Marcus said, positioning his hands. 1, 2... He pulled and twisted before he reached 3, knowing that the anticipation was often worse than the actual procedure. Running Bear's body went rigid, every muscle locked in agony, but he made no sound beyond a sharp exhalation. Marcus felt the bone align properly and quickly began fashioning a splint from the juniper branches and strips torn from his spare shirt. As he worked, the evening deepened around them. The sky turned from orange to deep purple, and the first stars began to appear. Running Bear's breathing gradually steadied, though his face remained pale beneath his weathered skin. "Why do you help me?" the chief asked quietly as Marcus secured the final knot in the makeshift sling. "Your people and mine. There is much bad blood." Marcus sat back on his heels, considering the question. The honest answer was complicated, tangled up with guilt and grief and a desperate need to balance some cosmic scale that had been weighted against him for too long. "Maybe because it's the right thing to do," he said finally. "Maybe because I've seen enough suffering for one lifetime. Maybe because my brother died calling for help that never came, and I swore I'd never walk away from someone who needed it." Running Bear studied him in the growing darkness. "You carry ghosts." "We all do." Marcus stood and helped the chief to his feet. "Question is whether we let them drive us or guide us. Can you ride? If the horse is gentle and the pace is slow." Running Bear tested his balance, swaying slightly but remaining upright. "My village is in the high country, a half-day's ride north. But perhaps your ranch is closer?" Marcus nodded. "About an hour east. You can rest there tonight, get your strength back before traveling. I've got medicine, real food, a soft bed if you want it." The offer surprised them both. In the normal course of things, a white rancher didn't invite a native chief into his home. The unspoken rules of their separate worlds made such gestures dangerous for both parties. But something about the evening, about the shared ritual of healing, had shifted the boundaries between them. They rode slowly through the desert night, Running Bear mounted on Marcus's gentle mare, while Marcus walked alongside, leading his own horse. The chief's injuries made him unsteady in the saddle, and twice Marcus had to reach out to keep him from falling. Each time, Running Bear nodded his thanks, and each time, the gesture seemed to deepen the tentative trust growing between them. The ranch appeared gradually out of the darkness, lamplight glowing warm and welcoming in the windows of the main house. Marcus helped Running Bear down from the horse and supported him up the steps to the porch. Inside, the house was simply furnished, but clean and comfortable. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, surrounded by shelves of books. A few photographs sat on the mantel. a young woman with kind eyes, a man in a Union Army uniform who bore a strong resemblance to Marcus. "Your family?" Running Bear asked, gesturing toward the photographs with his good hand. "My wife Sarah, taken by fever 3 years back. My brother Samuel, killed at Antietam." Marcus's voice was matter-of-fact, but Running Bear caught the undertone of old pain. "What about you? You mentioned sons." Running Bear settled carefully into the chair Marcus offered, his movements still cautious. "My oldest, Swift Hawk, leads our warriors now. He is protective of our people, sometimes too protective. My younger son, Grey Wolf, has more of his mother's gentle spirit. My daughter, Singing Bird, died in the winter sickness 2 years past. She was my heart." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Two men who had loved and lost, who carried the weight of leadership and responsibility. Marcus poured whiskey for both of them, and they drank slowly, the alcohol warming them against the desert chill that crept through the walls. "Your English is very good," Marcus observed. "Missionaries came to our valley when I was young. They taught us their language, their writing. Some of their ideas were useful, others less so." Running Bear's smile was wry. "I learned that understanding one's neighbors can be the difference between peace and war." Marcus nodded. "Wish more folks saw it that way. Seems like most people prefer their neighbors to stay strangers. Easier to hate what you don't know." "Yes," Running Bear agreed quietly. "Fear makes men stupid. Stupid men make wars." They talked long into the night, sharing stories of their different worlds, finding common ground in unexpected places. Both men had served their people as leaders. Both had made difficult decisions in times of crisis. Both understood the weight of responsibility for lives other than their own. As the fire burned low, Marcus made up a bed for his guest and retreated to his own room. But sleep came slowly. He kept thinking about the strangeness of the evening, how natural it had felt to share his home with a man who, by all the unwritten rules of their time and place, should have been his enemy. Dawn was breaking pale and golden over the eastern mountains when Marcus woke to the sound of horses. Many horses. He rose quickly, pulling on his pants and boots, and stepped onto the porch to see a sight that stopped his heart. At least 30 mounted warriors sat their horses in perfect silence at the edge of his property, their weapons visible but not threatening. At their head rode a younger man who bore a strong resemblance to Running Bear, Swift Hawk no doubt, come looking for his missing father. Running Bear emerged from the house behind Marcus, moving carefully but under his own power. His arm was still in the sling, but the color had returned to his face, and his eyes were clear and alert. He spoke to his son in their own language, his voice carrying clearly across the morning air. Swift Hawk's response was sharp, urgent, and Marcus caught enough of the tone to understand that the young war leader was not entirely pleased with the situation. "He is concerned," Running Bear said quietly to Marcus. "He fears treachery, that you have harmed me, or that this is some trap. His heart is good, but he has seen too much of how some white men treat our people." Marcus nodded, understanding completely. If positions were reversed, if his father had been missing all night and found in the home of a potential enemy, he would have reacted the same way. "What do you want to tell him?" "You?" Running Bear considered this, his gaze moving between his son and the man who had shown him kindness. "The truth," he said finally, "that there are still good men in the world, regardless of the color of their skin." The conversation between father and son continued for several minutes. Running Bear's voice calm and steady, Swift Hawk's responses gradually losing their edge of suspicion. The voices joined in as the older warriors offered their own perspectives. Marcus couldn't understand the words, but he could read the body language, the way tension slowly leaked out of shoulders and hands moved away from weapons. Finally, Swift Hawk dismounted and approached the porch. He was a man in his 30s, tall and powerfully built, with the kind of presence that marked him as a natural leader. His dark eyes studied Marcus carefully, looking for any sign of deception or hidden threat. My father says you set his broken bone and gave him shelter, Swifthawk said in accented but clear English. He says you asked for nothing in return. That's right, Marcus replied simply. Why? It was the same question Running Bear had asked, and Marcus gave the same answer. Because it was the right thing to do. Swifthawk continued to study him, then spoke again in his own language to his father. Running Bear responded at length, gesturing toward Marcus and then toward his splintered arm. Whatever he said caused a stir among the mounted warriors, and Marcus caught several of them looking at him with what seemed like approval. My father tells us you are a man of honor, Swifthawk said finally. He says you treated him as you would treat your own father, with respect and kindness. He says the spirits guided him to your path for a reason. Marcus wasn't sure how to respond to that, so he simply nodded. Swifthawk stepped closer, close enough that Marcus could see the intelligence and strength in his eyes, and the weight of responsibility he carried for his people's welfare. We have watched you for many seasons, Rancher. We know you do not steal our cattle or poison our water holes as some do. We know you treat the land with respect, but this, he gestured toward his father, this changes things between us. How so? Marcus asked carefully. Swifthawk turned back toward his warriors and spoke in their language. The response was immediate and unanimous. Voices raised in what sounded like agreement or approval. He turned back to Marcus with something that might have been a smile. My father is not just our chief. He is our medicine man, our keeper of sacred stories, our bridge between the world of men and the world of spirits. To harm him would bring great misfortune. To heal him, Swifthawk paused, choosing his words carefully. To heal him creates a debt that must be honored. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. I don't want anything from you. I didn't help him looking for payment. I know, Swifthawk said. That is what makes you worthy of payment. He gestured toward the assembled warriors. These are my father's blood sons, his adopted sons, the men who have sworn to protect him with their lives. You have earned their respect, and with it their protection. Running Bear stepped forward, placing his good hand on Marcus's shoulder. What my son is trying to say, my friend, is that you are no longer alone in this valley. You have brothers now, whether you asked for them or not. The full weight of what they were offering began to dawn on Marcus. In a land where survival often depended on alliances and mutual protection, he was being offered something precious beyond measure, acceptance into a community, a place to belong. For a man who had spent years in self-imposed isolation, carrying his guilt and grief like stones in his chest, the gesture was overwhelming. I don't know what to say, he managed. Say nothing, Running Bear advised with a gentle smile. Live worthy of the trust we place in you. Treat the land and its creatures with respect. Help when help is needed. These things you already do. Simply continue. One by one, the warriors dismounted and approached the porch. Each man placed his hand briefly on Marcus's shoulder or forearm, a gesture of respect and acceptance. Some spoke words in their own language that Marcus couldn't understand but felt in his bones. Others simply nodded, their eyes conveying what words could not. The last to approach was a young man barely out of his teens, his face earnest and eager. I am Grey Wolf, second son of Running Bear, he said in careful English. My father says you are a healer. Would you teach me? Not the white man's medicine, but the caring behind it, the spirit that drives a man to help another who is not of his blood. Marcus looked into the young man's eyes and saw something of his brother Samuel there, the same hunger for knowledge, the same desire to make the world a better place through his actions. I'd be honored to teach you what I know, he said quietly, though I think you already understand the most important part. Udins, as the sun climbed higher, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber, the warriors began to prepare for their journey back to the high country. Running Bear would travel with them, his injury stable enough for the slow trip home. But before they left, he pulled Marcus aside for a private word. My friend, he said, his voice low and serious, there are changes coming to this land. The railroad will arrive within 2 years, bringing more settlers, more soldiers, more pressure on all of us to choose sides. When that time comes, remember this day. Remember that beneath the color of our skin, we are all simply men, trying to make our way in a hard world. Remember that kindness is never wasted, even when it seems to disappear into the desert without a trace. Marcus nodded, understanding more than was being said. What are you telling me? I am telling you that you will not face those changes alone. My people will remember what you did here. We will remember that when you found one of us broken and helpless, you chose healing over harm. That memory will matter when the time comes. And they clasped hands, the white rancher and the native chief, 2 men who had found brotherhood in the most unlikely of circumstances. Running Bear mounted his horse with some assistance from his sons, and the entire group began to move away from the ranch, heading north toward the mountains that rose like ancient guardians against the horizon. Marcus stood on his porch and watched them go until they disappeared into the heat haze, leaving only dust and the memory of something profound. He felt different somehow, lighter, as if a weight he hadn't even realized he was carrying had been lifted from his shoulders. For the first time since Sarah's death, since Samuel's death, since all the accumulated losses and guilts of his life, he felt truly connected to something larger than himself. The seasons that followed brought changes to Marcus's life in ways both subtle and profound. Grey Wolf visited regularly, sometimes alone, sometimes with other young men from the tribe who were curious about the white rancher who had earned their father's respect. Marcus taught them what he knew of field medicine and animal husbandry, while they shared their knowledge of desert survival and the healing properties of native plants. A mutual respect grew between them, built on shared work and common purpose. True to Running Bear's word, the railroad did come, and with it the complications he had predicted. New settlers arrived regularly, some peaceful, others carrying the kind of prejudice and fear that led to conflict. There were tensions, misunderstandings, occasionally violence. But Marcus found himself in a unique position, trusted by both sides, able to serve as a bridge between worlds that too often saw each other as enemies. When drought threatened both the ranchers and the tribal lands, it was Marcus who facilitated the agreement that allowed Running Bear's people to water their horses at the settlers' wells, in exchange for their help fighting the prairie fires that threatened everyone's property. When rustlers began stealing cattle from both groups, it was the combined efforts of ranchers and warriors that tracked them down and recovered the herds. Not everyone approved of these arrangements. There were settlers who viewed Marcus's relationship with the tribe as treason, and there were warriors who saw any cooperation with white men as betrayal. But Running Bear's influence was strong, and Marcus's reputation for fairness and integrity gradually won over even the skeptics. 2 years after that morning, when the warriors had appeared at his ranch, Marcus received word that Running Bear was dying. The message came through Grey Wolf, who had become not just a student, but a close friend. The old chief had been fighting a lung sickness for months, and the tribal medicine men had done all they could. He was asking for Marcus. Marcus rode hard through the desert night, following Grey Wolf up treacherous mountain trails he had never seen before, into the hidden valley where Running Bear's people made their home. It was a beautiful place, green with grass and trees, fed by a spring that bubbled up from deep in the earth. The village was a collection of traditional lodges and more modern cabins, a blend of old ways and new necessities. Running Bear lay in the largest lodge, surrounded by his family and the tribal elders. He was greatly diminished from the strong man Marcus had first met, but his eyes were still bright with intelligence and warmth. When he saw Marcus, he smiled and gestured him closer. "My friend," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the crackling of the fire. "You came." "Of course I came," Marcus replied, kneeling beside the chief's bed. "What do you need?" Running Bear's smile widened slightly. "Nothing. Everything. I wanted to see you once more, to tell you—" He paused, gathering his strength. To tell you that the choice you made that night, to help an old man with a broken arm, changed more than you know. It planted a seed of trust that has grown into something neither of our peoples expected. You have been a bridge between worlds, Marcus Thornfield. Do not let anyone tell you that one man cannot make a difference. Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. I just did what felt right. Yes, Running Bear agreed. That is exactly what makes you worthy of respect. In your heart, you know the difference between right and wrong, and you have the courage to act on that knowledge. That is all any of us can do. They talked quietly for another hour, sharing memories of the years that had passed, speaking of hopes for the future. Running Bear extracted a promise from Marcus to continue looking after Grey Wolf and the other young men who'd come to see him as a teacher and mentor. As the night deepened, the old chief's breathing became more labored, and Marcus knew the end was near. Tell me about your wife, Running Bear whispered. Tell me about Sarah. Marcus spoke softly of the woman he had loved and lost, of her kindness and strength, of the dreams they had shared for their life together. Running Bear listened with the focused attention of a man who understood that love was the most precious thing in any world, regardless of the color of one's skin or the language one spoke. She would be proud of the man you have become, Running Bear said finally. She would be proud of the healing you have brought to this hard land. Those were among his last words. Running Bear, chief of the mountain band, keeper of sacred stories, bridge between worlds, died peacefully just before dawn, surrounded by his family and the white rancher who had become his friend. The funeral lasted 3 days, a complex ceremony that honored both the traditional ways and the changes that Running Bear had embraced during his lifetime. Marcus was invited to participate, to speak of his friendship with the chief and what it had meant to him. It was the first time a white man had been given such an honor, and Marcus felt the weight of that trust as he spoke of courage, kindness, and the bonds that transcend the artificial divisions men create between themselves. In the months that followed, Swifthawk proved to be as honorable a leader as his father had been, maintaining the alliances and agreements that had brought peace to the valley. Grey Wolf continued his visits to Marcus's ranch, bringing news from the high country and continuing his education in the healing arts. The relationship between the communities deepened and strengthened, weathering the occasional crisis through mutual respect and shared purpose. 5 years after that night, when Marcus had found a broken man beside a desert rock, he stood on his porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. The ranch had prospered, but more importantly, he had found something he hadn't even realized he was looking for, a sense of purpose, a place in the world, a family made not of blood, but of choice and mutual respect. Grey Wolf rode up as the stars began to appear, as he did most evenings now. He had grown into a fine man, skilled in both the traditional ways of his people and the practical knowledge Marcus had shared with him. He dismounted and joined Marcus on the porch, accepting the cup of coffee that had become their ritual. "My father visits me in dreams," Grey Wolf said quietly, gazing up at the star-filled sky. "He tells me the spirits are pleased with the path we have chosen. He says the healing you began that night continues to spread, like ripples in a still pond." Marcus nodded, understanding. The old chief's influence lived on in the decisions his people made, in the way they approached the challenges of a changing world. He was a wise man. I'm grateful I was able to know him. He often spoke of that night, Grey Wolf continued. He said it proved something he had always believed, that the spirits sometimes use the most ordinary moments to change the course of history. A broken arm, a choice to help instead of walking away, a willingness to see past the surface to the human need beneath, small things that become great things. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the night deepen around them. In the distance, coyotes called to each other across the desert, their voices weaving together in the ancient songs of survival and continuity. It was a good sound, Marcus thought. A reminder that life persisted despite all hardships, that tomorrow would bring new chances for healing and growth. As Grey Wolf prepared to ride back to his own home in the village, he turned to Marcus with a serious expression. "There is something I must tell you, something my father made me promise to share when the time was right." Marcus waited, sensing the importance of whatever was coming. "That night, when you found him, when you set his broken bone and brought him to your home, it was not accident. He had been watching you for months, learning your character, seeing how you treated the land and the animals in your care. The horse stepping in the prairie dog hole." Grey Wolf smiled slightly. "The horse was trained to avoid such holes. My father guided it there deliberately." Marcus stared at him, understanding slowly dawning. He wanted to test me. He wanted to know if the stories he had heard were true. Stories of a white rancher who was different from the others, who might be trusted, who might serve as a bridge between our peoples. He risked his own safety to learn the truth about your heart. Grey Wolf's expression grew solemn. "He could have died that night if you had chosen differently. That is how much faith he had in the man you had shown yourself to be." The revelation stunned Marcus into silence. All these years he had thought of that night as a chance encounter, a random moment when he had happened to do the right thing. To learn that it had been orchestrated, that Running Bear had deliberately put himself at Marcus's mercy as a test of character, was both humbling and awe-inspiring. "Why are you telling me this now?" Marcus asked finally. "Because the test never ended," Grey Wolf replied. "Every day since then, you have continued to prove worthy of the trust he placed in you. Every choice you have made, every bridge you have built between our peoples, every young warrior you have taught the value of compassion over conquest, all of it has been part of the same test. And you have passed, my friend. You have passed with honors that will be remembered for generations." Nay, as Grey Wolf rode away into the darkness, Marcus remained on the porch, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he had learned. Running Bear had risked his life on a gamble that there was goodness in the heart of a stranger, and that gamble had paid dividends beyond anything either man could have imagined. The broken arm had healed, but the healing that had begun that night had spread far beyond one man's injury to encompass an entire community. Marcus looked up at the stars, thinking of Sarah, of Samuel, of Running Bear, of all the people who had shaped his journey to this moment. He thought of the choices that had led him here, some made in wisdom, others in error, all of them part of the complex tapestry of a life lived in service to something greater than oneself. In the morning, there would be new challenges, new opportunities to build bridges or tear them down, new tests of character and courage. But tonight, Marcus Thornfield stood beneath the vast western sky and felt the profound satisfaction of a man who had discovered his purpose and lived worthy of it. The rancher who had treated a chief's broken arm had found something he hadn't known he was looking for, a home not just in the land, but in the community of souls who had chosen to trust each other across all the barriers that divide human hearts. The wind whispered through the sage, carrying the scent of rain and the promise of tomorrow, and Marcus smiled, knowing that whatever came next, he would not face it alone.